Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, under will.
And I believe in one earth, the mother of us all, and in one womb wherein all men are begotten, and wherein they shall rest. Mystery of mystery, in her name, Babalon. Most of you, I think, are familiar with that particular little line from the Creed in the Gnostic Mass. When I start putting together one of these talks, the first thing is to define for myself what it is I'm talking about, and then let the thing flow from that. That doesn't work with Babalon, because she defines us. If she is the womb, the mother from which all of us have come, however you want to interpret that, metaphysically, psychologically, psychospiritually, occultly, or whatever adverb you want to throw at it, you can't define her because her scope is always bigger than any of us. So you're going to find this is rather a segmented presentation. And I'm going to start with the obvious start point, which is where she first shows up as a figure. The city of Babalon was known for luxury and high living in ancient times, and it was the place of captivity of the Jewish people, the Babylonian captivity that they got out from, I think, in the 460s BC, somewhere around there. Then she shows up in this strange apocalypse, the revelation of St. John the Divine. Crowley said of that in The Vision and the Voice, Liber 418, all I get is that the apocalypse was the recension, that means edited version, of a dozen or so totally disconnected allegories that were pieced together and ruthlessly planed down to make them into a connected account. And that recension was rewritten and edited in the interests of Christianity, because people were complaining, I don't know how he thinks he knows this, but anyway, because people were complaining that Christianity could show no true spiritual knowledge or any food for the best minds. Nothing but miracles, which only deceived the most ignorant, and theology, which only suited pedants. There's also a popular view of the revelation that in fact it is one or several initiatory documents, always references to the 7 seals and so on, or 7 bowls or 7 lamps, are coded references to the 7 chakras. It's worth noting in this connection that there is no known reference to chakras in Indian philosophy or Buddhist philosophy anywhere until somewhere around about 800 or 900 AD. And there is a community of scholars out there who are proposing that in fact a lot of stuff that we now think of as the ancient wisdom of the East might have been the ancient wisdom of the Mediterranean, which went that way into Asia, as opposed to coming back out, which is the usual theosophical view of things. Whatever. In chapter 17 of the Revelation. And there came one of the 7 angels that had the 7 bowls and spake with me, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the judgment of the great harlot that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and they that dwell on the earth were made drunken with the wine of her fornication. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet-coloured beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stone and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations, even the unclean things of her fornication. And upon her forehead a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And on it goes. What an awful, awful spectre she is. When you get to a shift of aeons, the old gods become the demons. In our Thelemic aeon, we look on the patristic deities on Jesus, all of this lot, and think, boo hiss, we don't want you anymore. And we turn to what used to be the demonic forces and say, you can be the liberators. Crowley suggests that simply what had happened was there was an accurate vision of this Babalon figure. But people at that time, 19 centuries ago, were incapable of grasping what might be signified by this figure of Babalon. And therefore they reacted with scorn and horror and revulsion and all of that stuff. You find that something of a shift happens when you come down 15 centuries after the Revelation, when John Dee and Edward Kelly were doing their Enochian magic. And they came up with this description of the figure of Babalon. Now remember, she pertains to the Sephira Bina on our tree, which is understanding. Bina simply means that, understanding, although you need to stretch your concept of what to understand means, if you're going to get what this is about. I am the daughter of fortitude. This is Babalon speaking to them in the angelic workings. And ravished every hour from my youth. For behold, I am understanding, and science dwelleth in me, and the heavens oppress me. They cover and desire me with infinite appetite, for none that are earthly have embraced me. For I am shadowed with the circle of the stars, and covered with the morning clouds. My feet are swifter than the winds, and my hands are sweeter than the morning dew. My garments are from the beginning, and my dwelling place is in myself. The lion knoweth not where I walk, neither do the beasts of the fields understand me. The lion knoweth not, I just said that, I am deflowered, yet a virgin. I sanctify, and am not sanctified. Happy is he that embraceth me, for in the night season I am sweet, and in the day full of pleasure. My company is a harmony of many symbols, and my lips sweeter than health itself. I am a harlot for such as ravish me, and a virgin with such as know me not. For lo, I am loved of many, and I am a lover to many, and as many as come unto me as they should do, have entertainment. And you can take the word entertainment, remembering this is Tudor times, it has more than the implication of kind of a strip show with benefits. There's a shift happened. They're starting to find something more complete, more nuanced in this Babalon figure. But there isn't much that changes until we get the shift in the aeons in 1904, and the Aeon of Horus begins. Now, as I just said a few minutes ago, I'm doing a talk on the aeons a month from now here, and we'll be looking more at what an aeonic shift means at that time. But essentially, the underlying archetypes, the underpinnings, the psycho-spiritual roots of the time that you are in, undergo a fundamental shift when there is an aeonic transformation, an equinox of the gods, as we say there. There are 4 Sephiroth on the standard tree of life that respectively refer to the 4 letters of the great name of God, the Tetragrammaton, Yod, He, Vav, He, which is variously pronounced Yahweh or Jehovah or what in various forms, but nobody supposedly knows the exact pronunciation these days. If they are, they're not saying. They pertain, though, on the tree to the 4 Sephiroth that I've marked with pins. Chokmah, or wisdom. Bina, which we already said was understanding. Tifereth, beauty is the usual word, although it can also mean splendor or resonance or resplendence. And Malkuth, or the kingdom. And in the Kabbalistic system, they also refer to the fundamental father archetype, the fundamental mother archetype, the archetype of the son, and the archetype of the daughter. We need to watch this archetypes notion. And I'm going to digress, or seemingly digress, a little bit before we go on with this. Mostly when we come across the term archetype, we take it from Jung, who was doing all of this work with dreams and myths and legends and pulling out these figures that seem to embody racial consciousness or certain sets of ideas or certain drives in human beings. But when the idea was invented, and the word simply means ancient pattern, arche, type, from Greek. And it was Plato and the Neoplatonists like Plotinus who were using it and kicking it around. They were referring to fundamental ideas or patterns that prefigure the mythic stuff that Jung was on about. I don't know how many of you are into Ken Wilber's work. Slight blank looks. American spiritual philosopher. He's got his enemies, but I think he's worth reading. I got this out of his book, A Brief History of Everything. And he's talking about the problem of what he calls the pre-trans issue. You find this with Freud. He's talking about, if you have a mystical experience, it's because you regressed to the mother state when you were just a tiny baby and connected to the mother of the breast. And you were in a state of oneness and no sense of anything but just warm bliss and stuff. No. Anybody who's actually had revelatory, visionary, samadhic, or higher-end experiences has found that you have not regressed to some kind of blanking out of everything and motherly warmth. That's there. There is joy and there's liberation and there's a tremendous sense of, wow, I'm in love, living in love, being in a consciousness of love at this moment. But you've got all the perceptions going on. You can see and understand things. The power of discrimination is there. It just is about seeing distinctions rather than creating judgments or hierarchical decisions about what's good and what's bad. It's quite different. So there's the pre-conscious state and the transpersonal state that Wilber goes on about. And he feels that we've made a lot of errors with this. Some psychiatrists continue to do this, or secular philosophers do. Jung himself often muddles them. The crucial point, says Wilber, is that collective is not necessarily transpersonal. Most of the Jungian archetypes are simply archaic images. There is little that's transrational or transpersonal about them. It's important to come to terms with these archetypes to differentiate and integrate them. But they are not themselves the source of transpersonal or genuinely spiritual awareness. In fact, for the most part, they are regressive pulls in awareness, lead weights around higher development, precisely what has to be overcome, not simply embraced. He points out that most of Jung's data came from the problems his patients presented and from his studies of myths. Wilber has done some work with both Hindu Vedanta and Tibetan Buddhism, so he's done his homework, this guy. And he goes on, take as only one example, the 18 stages of transpersonal growth outlined in the Mahamudra tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, which is essentially what started in the Nyingma school, the oldest of the Tibetan schools. 18 stages. These are extraordinarily detailed descriptions of the stages of evolution of higher and transpersonal awareness. And none of these stages appear in any of the world's classical myths. You will not find these stages in the stories of Zeus or Hector or Little Red Riding Hood. The real archetypes, he continues, are subtle seed forms upon which all of manifestation depends. The entire cosmos emerges straight out of emptiness, out of primordial purity. He likes to show that he's done his reading here. Out of Nirguna Brahman, out of the Dharmakaya, out of unquantifiable Godhead, radiant Ein Sof, and the first forms that emerge out of this emptiness are the basic forms upon which all lesser forms depend for their being. Now, in our Kabbalistic system, which is essentially what we use as the primary reference point or reference system in Thelema, the most archetypal ideas, the true archetypal ideas, are in what we call the supernal triangle at the top of the tree. So when we're talking about Babalon as a mother, yeah, she embodies that. She does have this mythical, legendary quality. But she also expresses something that goes beyond what Jung conventionally talks about and comes closer to what Wilber's on about here. Similarly, the beast, who is in Hochmar here, yes, he is a father figure, which to many people seems odd as an epithet to ascribe to the beast of Revelation. But he is also an outpouring of spiritual awareness, a flood of information coming to us all the time. And really you can't comprehend Babalon without the beast. The tarot card Lust is showing quite literally Babalon and the beast conjoined, which is the working formula for magic in our Aeon. So, out of wisdom, out of Hochmar, we're not talking about bits of information and helpful hints on how to survive life in a material cosmos. We're talking about a flow, a Tao, an ongoing current, an onrushing life force that carries with it illumination.
So, do you see their union as a metaphor for like the controlling the Kundalini force, because that is related to that card as well?
It is very much related to Kundalini, yes. Okay. There is a definite reference to Kundalini in this card. The letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Teth, which means a serpent, and Crowley is quite explicit in the Book of Thoth that that is what's going on.
No, I mean in the union between Babalon and...
Yep, in fact, somewhere in my pages here, I've got some specifics on that one. So the answer is yes. Okay. There is this outpouring of energy. And if our energy goes flooding, you think of a burst water main, you've got a problem. But eventually it follows the contours of the land or the street and finds its own channels. Babalon over here is receptive to that outpouring. If that is wisdom, understanding is the appreciation, is the acceptance, is the absorption, is the taking in and fashioning or forming or directing or channeling of that outpouring. And that is what the womb of Babalon is all about. Or that's one aspect of Babalon here. So as the mother of abominations, the great whore, and all of these other terms that we've already said flip around in our Aeon, the demonic deities of the past are suddenly found to be the redeemers in this one. She has this collective or mythic aspect to her. And you'll find throughout Thelemic writings, that especially Crowley's inspired writings, terms like death, poison, hell, and abominations are actually positive terms because they are transformative terms. When something dies, it doesn't disappear, it's transformed. Poison is something that will break down all of your narrow and restricting attitudes and understandings. Hell can be simply a way of coming to terms with the essence of stuff that you've always tried to keep down, but which needs to come out for your overall spiritual and psychological health, abominations, and so on. So, our whore, our dreadful, awful, disreputable woman, becomes the Shakti who arouses the serpent flame within. She draws out the Kundalini that must rise for these transpersonal and transcendent states that Wilbur was talking about to begin to open. She operates outside of conventional consciousness and conventional survival needs. I took a long time coming to terms with the figure of Babalon when I first encountered this. Something wasn't right, and I felt that if you see on Facebook, there are often depictions of her, and they get 47 likes on Facebook immediately. She's this kind of centerfold figure, busting out, "Give it to me, big boy." And I looked at that and thought, it's not that that's wrong, that this should be happening. Women should be owning their own sexuality. Our Book of the Law says this is what is going on. But she's more than just the sex force. Yes, she is going to inspire and she is going to instigate sexual activity. She's going to be at the root of seduction in the best sense of that term. But she is this understanding because she can absorb all things. And that's possibly the hardest of the paradoxes to grasp. That as a figure, she can absorb everything that comes at her. And in that way, within us as individuals, she is close to the concept of the ground of being, the perpetual witness, that in us which is always seeing what is experienced. I think something like that emerges when you had Christian martyrs going to the stake. I mean, some of them would die screaming. Others would simply pass out of everyday consciousness. You may know the legend of St. Lawrence, who was roasted on a gridiron, making the comment at one point, "I think I'm done on this side." So they turned him over. He was just gone from everyday existence. He was identified with a far profounder level of being. Profound ground of being. All of these are going to be very tenuous words. As I said at the start, you can't define Babalon. She defines us. So we're using a lot of 75-cent words to try and get a sense of what's going on in all of this.
How would you relate her non-archetypal aspects in soft or that area? How would you, is there an aspect of her that you consider to be there, and if so, how?
In Ein Sof?
In any of the higher areas.
I don't do a lot of living myself up in three negative veils. That's a little bit beyond the manifest universe, so I tend to hedge my bets on that one. In the Book of the Law, Nuit is presented, and she is the Ein Sof, the limitlessness of infinite space and the infinite stars thereof. The Book of the Law also tells us, or tells Crowley, and to him, she is known by my name, I am known by my name Nuit, and to him by a secret name, which I will give unto him when at last he knoweth me. He felt that Babalon was the name that was given to him once he understood what he was doing. But I think if Nuit is vast, I was trying to define this earlier, and I came up with 5 contradictory definitions for myself. You could say that Nuit is almost the abstract proposition, even though she is spoken of very lovingly in the Book of the Law. Babalon is further down into the universe, into creation, and therefore is the expression of the womb in a more comprehensible sense. If she is understanding, she is also understandable. You're always going to find problems with trying to make specific definitions, but you can get a feeling of what she's about. You can get an appreciation and an empathic sense of what you're looking at here with the mother figure. Yet, if you actually had a vision or union with Babalon as Babalon, I think it would be samadhi, it would be a cosmic vision. It would be way beyond any form of mundane consciousness that came through. Most of us know the story of what happened in 1909 when Crowley was going with his friend and lover, Victor Neuberg, over the Tunisian desert, working the Enochian system. We mentioned D.M. Kelly, who'd come up with this earlier. So around 300 years later, they were doing this systematic invocation of the 30 ethers of the Enochian system. And this culminated, well, the ultimate culmination was they did the last of the ethers. But the big transition at this stage was Crowley's crossing of the abyss in symbolic and ceremonial form through a scrying, and also visions of the Scarlet Woman, Babalon. Now we're using words like the abyss. The abyss doesn't exist. The only problem is that anyone who gets to a certain point in their own evolution experiences an abyss. Everything below that top triangle there represents different aspects of human existence, human nature, human spirituality, coming all the way down to physical existence, right in that one at the bottom, Malkuth. And all of these are active in all of us all of the time. The idea is to recover and recuperate and rehabilitate all the different aspects of ourselves as we work up the tree, until finally we get to chesed, which is usually translated as mercy. These English terms are rather restricting. It's a very limited term, mercy. You're looking at an embrace of a lot of stuff. The key thing would be chesed is associated with memory. Not just, oh yeah, I remember what happened in 1975. Gosh, that was fun. It's about remembering all the parts of yourself, putting your whole being together and getting a sense of what you are. Not just as a human being, but as a suprahuman being with divine energy, with divine awareness constantly expanding and growing within you. But if this sense of a separate being having this experience is going to give way to a true union with the suprapersonal, where the suprapersonal takes over and the ego, the regular everyday self, is going to be seen simply as a tool you use, as a mask. You know, it's my glasses. It helps to see, but I can still make out everyone without them. But it's really a helpful thing. But you would reach the point where you began to realize that you were a manifestation of the infinite as opposed to an individual being looking into the infinite. It's all going to flip around. Getting to that point, which would represent the initiation of Bina, understanding, requires sacrificing, surrendering, giving, offering, joyously throwing out everything that you have built up as a spiritual aspirant, going through all of this mystery work and giving lectures and reading books and doing ceremonies and stuff. And to give up that sense of individual selfhood means staring into the concept of non-existence as a distinct being with rights and privileges and legal obligations and all of that stuff, just becoming something suprapersonal. Hence this idea of an abyss. Crowley also calls it the desert. I know 3 people who've told me they've done this in terms that convinced me that they knew what they were talking about. And it just meant everything is starting to fall apart. Nothing makes sense anymore. It's kind of like having a total nervous breakdown on all levels, yet you continue going through life while you're doing it. Crowley was able to do the critical step in this series of scryings that he did with Victor in the desert of Tunisia. And one of the things he had, as he was getting close to the critical stage, he got to the 12th of these ethers, or realms of vision. And he gets his own vision of Babalon. And this is what Victor recorded as Crowley was going through the vision. The charioteer speaks in a low, solemn voice, awe-inspiring like a large and very distant bell. Let him look upon the cup, whose blood is mingled therein. For the wine of the cup is the blood of the saints. Glory unto the scarlet woman, Babalon, the mother of abominations, that rideth upon the beast, for she hath spilt their blood in every corner of the earth, and lo, she hath mingled it in the cup of her whoredom. With the breath of her kisses hath she fermented it, and it hath become the wine of the sacrament, the wine of the Sabbath. And in the holy assembly hath she poured it out for her worshippers, and they had become drunken thereon, so that face to face they beheld my Father, capital F. Thus are they made worthy to become partakers of the mystery of this holy vessel, for the blood is the life. So sitteth she from age to age, and the righteous are never weary of her kisses. And by her murders and fornications she seduceth the world. Therein is manifested the glory of my Father, who is truth. Crowley then commented to Neuberg, this wine is such that its virtue radiateth through the cup, and I reel under the intoxication of it. And he was in this trance state, but keeping himself just enough in touch with his scribe Victor to be able to relate what was going on. And I reel under the intoxication of it, and every thought is destroyed by it. It abideth alone, and its name is compassion. I understand by compassion the sacrament of suffering partaken by the true worshippers of the highest. And it is an ecstasy in which there is no trace of pain. Its passivity, or passion, is like the giving up of the self to the beloved. This is the mystery of Babalon, the mother of abominations, and this is the mystery of her adulteries, for she hath yielded up herself to everything that liveth, and hath become a partaker in its mystery. And because she hath made herself the servant of each, therefore is she become the mistress of all. Not as yet canst thou comprehend her glory. Beautiful art thou, O Babalon, and desirable, for thou hast given thyself to everything that liveth, and thy weakness hath subdued their strength. For in that union thou didst understand. Therefore art thou called understanding, O Babalon, Lady of the Night. Not bad for spontaneous stuff coming straight through him. He was clearly not. I mean, Crowley could talk, but that was pretty poetic stuff. So this is the vision he's having of the mother, while knowing that this is an archetype, not an actual person. He is coming up to this transition to the consciousness of Bina. We're still not very close to being able to say what it is she is, because she is beyond conceptions here. We've seen a little bit of that in that passage. She can absorb everything. She is the whore in that sense. A whore is available for whatever you want to pay for. And yet she is perpetually virgin. We had that in that passage from D. and Kelly earlier, as well as from what Crowley is coming to. Why is she perpetually virgin? Because she's not touched by it. She can absorb everything and let it pass through. She is not tied down to form, even though she is the mother of form. She is the former. But she has this, we give her the mother image because the mother is our symbol for the womb. but even pinning her down to woman as a label, I think, puts a bit of a restriction here. I mentioned before I had a problem with the idea of her for a long time, and I think part of it comes from the way Crowley related to her much of his life. In his confessions, he speaks with a lot of admiration of his father, who died when he was 12. His father was a fundamentalist preacher going around England, but Crowley speaks of him as somebody with a lot of integrity. His mother, Emily, on the other hand, he had a very complex relationship with, and ultimately he describes her as a brainless bigot. She was trapped in this fundamentalism and couldn't come out of it. Whenever he's describing the women that he loved or the women that he was with, he's enthusiastic because they are wonderful sexual partners, or they had abilities as magicians and occultists. Going through the confessions, and I've been rereading a lot of it recently, I can't find a passage where he admires either the intellect or what I would call the moral integrity of any of these women.
That is very noticeable as a female studying literature. So.
Yeah. I want to be careful not to try and redefining it because I know better than Crowley does. But I think that because of his relationship to women, he found more complete partners in men. The men he loved, Victor being probably the primary one, he was able to give himself to more because they were intellectually compatible. He may well have been intellectually compatible with Leah Herzig or Leila Waddell, but that's not what he speaks of. He speaks of the charm of them or their libido or whatever, but not about the fact that these women really had something between the ears. Yet the book of the law tells us that in this aeon, the woman is armed and militant and girt with a sword. The sword is the symbol of the mind and intellect and the power of discrimination. I notice if you go to the very last years of his life, after this career of seeing women as kind of his helpers, but not really his equals, even if he appointed them to the office of Scarlet Woman, you find him working with two women that he couldn't have worked with earlier. One we were discussing in this room a few months ago, Frida Harris, who helped him design the Thoth Tarot deck. And it was clear that her creative gifts took that from being just, one of these simplistic little doodles or cutesy tarot cards to something with a lot of depth. The two of them worked together on this, and she was able to manage the man. The other one, and we don't know much about the relationship, was the occultist Dion Fortune, Violet Firth, who was working with him in the last year or two of his life. Doing what? Nobody really knows. The only witness we've got is his then secretary, Kenneth Grant. But clearly he was now working in the last phases of his existence with women who came up to his standards, or I would say he'd finally begun to realize this was part of the error he'd made all along. He had not fully validated the female in the system. So you have these powerful female archetypes, whether we're talking mythic figure or we're talking the ultimate ancient patterns, or they are basically sluts that he can use in ritual or just for fun, but there's nothing in between. And I think if Babalon is going to have a significance in the future development of Thelema, it is going to come from an evolution of how we relate to Babalon. And a lot of that has to be done by women. We're in a bit of a catch-22 because Thelema's been off-putting to women in some ways, many ways. And we need the women who are in Thelema to embody the best aspects of the archetype. as they are individually able to do, to recreate and develop the idea. I don't think anyone should try to be Babalon. Even when Crowley, when he defines himself as the beast, he was aware that this was not exactly who he was. It was an office that he occupied in the Aeon. He says this. I can't remember the source right now. I did come across it. Either way, he finally realized beast is something I do. It's not necessarily what I am. I'm still just a human, Aleister Crowley. And the various women who had served as Scarlet Woman, as Babalon to his beast, there were about 7 or 8 that we know of, were all occupying the office for a certain period of time. But they weren't Babalon themselves. Should you or can you invoke it into yourself? I'm always wary of the idea of taking a mythic or magical figure on for extended periods of time. The whole point in ritual, as we're taught it in these mystery schools, is you decide what it is you're going to do and why. Okay, you set up your ritual space with what you need, then you banish it, you clear everything unwanted that shouldn't be in there, and that kicks you into sacred space and time. Or the invocation itself does that. But you do enough things that put you in a different frame of mind. You do the working once you've done the invocation. Then you close down and you banish what you've pulled in and close off and step out and go back into mundane self. I've known a couple of women who've tried to invoke and live with Babalon. One was actually working for about 8 or 9 months as a call girl, and she felt she needed that strength to go through this experience. She had chosen to do this. I was never entirely clear, but it was a psychological process that she felt she had to go through in order to claim her own sexuality in some way. The results she reported to me were mixed. I think she got it out of a system, but she realized that she was always very much on the brink, not just from the physical danger that any kind of prostitute runs, that you might have a crazy customer, but also because she was in a headspace that put her in a wild place where she might go over the top. I just pass that on to anyone who thinks it would be so cool to be Babalon all the time and say, maybe no. Yes, in set situations, in ritual and ceremonial where it works, or within the context of intimate relationships, whether they are long-term or not long-term. But you need to know that you're dealing with a kick-ass mama, and you have to be cautious in how you bring that energy in, unless you can also banish it when the working is done. Some magicians have tried to go this, not just women, but male magicians have tried to bring in a deity and keep it with them. And one of the problems is whether you've invoked something sacred or, when you have done that sacred invocation, you're still you. You can still have a bad day. Your energy is low. It's the weather, it's the boss, it's the lineup of planets out there. Whatever it is, you're going to have a bad day, and if you are trying to mingle a bad day with a deity, what you get is the bad side of the deity, and that's going to be a pretty heavy thing to experience. Are we getting anywhere with this? It's all still skirting around the topic, isn't it? What is it I'm on about? I kept asking myself as I was collecting all this information, what is it I'm trying to say here? Let's go back to the mother thing. This, conventionally, is the female pillar, the pillar of form. And on our tree of life, that is the pillar of force, the male pillar. It's important to remember that male and female are energies And it's only on one level that we actually have bodies aligned to male or female. This is one of the things that is happening with the evolution of our aeon. We're starting to accept that people have very, very individual sexual styles. And you may be a heterosexual male with a rather feminine nature. You may be a homosexual male with a very masculine energy. It's all over the place. And these are still these patterns and forces and drives within us that we're talking about. We personify them, we symbolize them, we represent them for magical purposes so that we can work with them and go through transformations in ourselves. But we are not believers in most cases in the way that a true Christian of the Baptist Church just up Broadview would be a believer in Jesus Christ. We recognize that these are things within that form what we are. And form, of course, is the thing I'm going on about tonight. The Tree of Life is, it's a map, it's a diagram. It's not an absolute. There are even different ways of doing the same thing, with concentric circles or in a square pattern. There's all kinds of stuff. But in this form, it's easiest to see how things contribute to the person that we are. Male energy, which we call wisdom. Female formation, understanding. Roots of human nature. They pass down the tree through the different traits of individuality, through the traits of personality, to the actual human result that is sitting in this room, about a dozen of us. But if you're going to get everything rightly lined up or working optimally, then you need to trace back to what you are. That is where the mother and figure archetypes, the beast and Babalon, come into the picture. There's an old Kabbalistic legend, I scribbled a note on this. Raziel, the archangel of Chokmah, and each of these 10 spheres or Sephiroth has an archangel, is eternally and incessantly broadcasting the secrets of creation from the top of the sacred mountain. He's literally yelling them out for everyone to hear. This is this outpouring of wisdom I was talking about before. But unless and until these secrets are understood in the sense of hearing and appreciating, that is not intellectually figured out and written down and quantified and statistically analyzed, but appreciated and taken in, they go out into space unheard and unnoticed. So if we're really going to understand the roots of our own nature, yeah, we need reason and rational stuff in order to get through everyday life, to do a job, to go and buy stuff in the store, whatever it is. Maintaining a body requires analysis of what it requires. Ooh, I need soap because I smell, and so on. But understanding is about transcending all of the categories and bringing things back to their origin. If she's the womb, emanating all the things that are, then looked at from the other end, that's the origin point and the root of our nature. And we go back to that root of our nature when we are fulfilling ourselves, when we are realizing the different aspects of what we are and what we could be. Traditionally, the planetary association with this Sephira is Saturn or Kronos, the deity of time. Yet I remember the very first meditation I ever did on Bina. It was about after my third lesson in this stuff, and I thought, this looks interesting. I'll take the symbolism that they've given me. And I got into this state where there wasn't much time. It was suspended. And I thought, this is so cool. Because I'm aware that I'm in a room with stuff going on, but at the same time I feel I'm in this timelessness. 3 days later, I came out of the timelessness and was very glad to get back into mundane consciousness. If there's one reason why I've stuck with this game for years, it's because of that initial experience. It was, I had no formal training other than 2 or 3 lectures like this with a friendly little guy who was teaching it. And the symbolism and the ideas kicked me that far down the road immediately, and it said, look, this stuff has potency. This system is workable. It does cool stuff. If you hang about in Binar at all, you find that time goes through this transformation. Yes, it's still going on, yet it really isn't very important. In one of Crowley's holy books, the book of the Heart Girl with the serpent, there's an image, I think, in the first chapter where he is flying on the back of a great white bird. And a crazy little boy said, "Whither goest thou?" And the crazy little boy is the intellect. And he laughingly replies, "No whither, no whence. Just going, we wing eternally." And that is kind of the sort of thing that we're implying with Bina. Babalon is the bridge to this. We've got a figure that we can relate to because she is still the mother, even if she's a really hot, sizzling mama. And we can celebrate her as not the oppressive mother of older traditions, but someone who wants our liberation and freedom. People's experience varies, but a lot of us have had an experience of a mother who was afraid to let go. I think it's changing now, but I was brought up in the middle of the English middle classes, where the word of the law was respectability. If you lost respectability, you had nothing. Now, this was rubbish. I mean, the moment I got rid of respectability, I started having fun. And life started taking on meaning. But my mother was hidebound by this, and her mantra was normality, and I always asked, well, what is normal? And of course, asking the question was a very frustrating thing. She couldn't define it. It was so unquestionable in her mind that she couldn't step out of this. At the time, I resented it, and for years after, I figured I needed to be in recovery from the experience. Now I can look back and think, well, this is what was being done to you. This was what was being done to everyone. The state we were in what we call the previous aeon, but especially in the last few centuries of it, was very oppressive to women because we had stressed the father figure, the father god, demanding virtue. We're still seeing this with fundamentalist Islam. There are some feminist strands in the Islamic world, even as I speak, but all the headlines are going towards the people who are panicking at that and trying to drag it back. The father is insisting on purity and self-denial and self-restriction. The actual aim, oddly, is to separate out individuality from mass-mindedness. But individuality is only defined as spiritual devotion to God. We'd still define it as that in this aeon as well. It's just that we've redefined what we mean by God. And we have very much brought the goddess back into the picture. You can relate Babalon to some pagan deities. Durga in India, Sekhmet from Egypt. That's a particular one that I would go to. But she's not like Isis, and she's not like Lakshmi, and she's not like these sweetie pies. Most of you know that I spent 5.5 years living in Mexico. And I finally realized just how horribly pervasive the Virgin of Guadalupe is in that society. She holds everything together. She's this sweet mother figure. But she sucks so much out of everybody, because you have to just live in faith, you have to live in devotion. And it's a Mexican equivalent of my mother's religion of normality. You can't go outside of these bounds. I think there was a time when the Madonna, the Virgin Mary, actually had a different aspect to her. And you can still sometimes find that in Europe when you come in contact with black Madonnas. I had 1 or 2 encounters with Madonna figures that really quite shocked me. I've told this one before, but I'll go through it again quickly. When I went to Barcelona, there is, outside of that city, the sacred mountain of Montserrat, and it really has a strange look when you see it in the distance. It looks like it was painted on the scenery of the hills. It stands up with these very jagged, surreal monoliths all around it. And in the right light, they look like giants or animal figures or things out of myth and legend. On the mountain, there is a monastery devoted to the Virgin of Montserrat, who is one of these black Madonnas, and she's got the little Christ child on her hand, on her knee. And she's blessing things like this, and you can go and touch that hand. So I thought, okay, I'll pay my respects. And then I realized as we were getting close to the point where you go up above the altar to see this figure, it's about this big. They wanted money. It's the Catholic Church. I mean, all religions want money. We asked for money when we started the talk because we've got to pay for this place. And they have one hell of a place to pay for, so they wanted lots of cash. So I thought, oh, I suppose I'll dive into my pocket. I'll give them the change I've got. Now, if you know anything about Hebrew gematria and the allocation of numbers to letters, you might know that Babalon is equated to the number 156, which is 12 by 13. So I pulled out my change and I found I had €1.56. Well, this was wonderfully wicked. I thought, yes, perfect! Put the money in the slot. And at that moment, I'm not clairaudient, but I heard something say, yes, that's right. And the people behind me were Japanese and they didn't speak a word of English, so it wasn't them. Stepped up to this figure, and everyone's reverently reaching out to touch the hand, and genuflecting and going on. So I shuffle up, I'm just looking at it and thinking, that's an interesting piece of medieval wood carving, and looking at the form of it and thinking it was a rather finely proportioned piece of work, and all of that, and finally do the hand touch. And for about 1.25 seconds, I was kicked right into Bina. And I don't even know what I mean by saying that, because I went so much further in than I'd ever been before I came back down with a discomforting shock. This thing had obviously come from an ancient tradition that I think was pre-Christian. More than that I can't say, but I just developed a conviction while I was there that this place has been sacred for thousands of years, and then I picked up the guidebook and found, yes, people have been here since the Stone Age. So there was something going on. But there's always been a Bina type of figure to relate to in Western religion, and in much Asian religion as well. Now she's transformed because she's come out. She's unveiled finally. She's let loose. She is the Scarlet Woman because she is shameless before all men. She exposes herself and dares us to challenge her. So she is about realization on very ordinary levels as well. In particular, and Crowley had to push hard for this and got lots of flack for it as being a dreadful pervert. had to push, she's pushing us towards the idea that sexuality is sacred. We're getting there. It's starting to penetrate mass consciousness. People may not use that term, yet there is a reverence to sexuality that I'm finding in people a lot younger than myself that my generation wasn't able to experience that. It was still naughty fun. We were having a lot more fun, I'm going back 70s, 80s. But it was still a battle that is increasingly won more every year. So she is the mother who doesn't say, no dear, you mustn't. She's the mother who says, if you feel like doing it. There was a whole fuss a week or so back about Bowie that apparently had sex with a 14-year-old or 15-year-old. I made a 14 from the information given. Should men of a certain age be hunting underage women? No, I don't think that's what we're supposed to be doing. On the other hand, as was pointed out by one of the commentators, there's been so much of a fuss about rejecting women's testimony that they have been raped. Oh, we don't believe you. You were leading him on. What were you doing there? When he came on to you, why didn't you leave the bar, the house, whatever it was, and so on and so on. There's always an excuse to say, we will minimize your experience, which I agree is a wrong thing to be doing. By the same token, if a woman is saying decades afterwards, look, this was a cool experience. Yeah, I was 14 and deflowered by J. David Bowie, and my God, that was, check that one off. You've got to be careful with it. Because, as I say, it can lead to exploitation from the male end, an older man, much younger woman. But if that is her experience of herself, and that is something that she still feels that she wants to say hallelujah about 35, 40 years on, should we be saying, oh, you're wrong? No, that is her experience, and she gets to own that. This has been still a terrible battleground. We're seeing it in the States with